My name is Sarah Calloway. I am 34 years old. I bought the DNA kit on a Thursday in November. It was on sale. $29, marked down from $79. I saw it on a display near the front of a pharmacy on my way home from work, wedged between the reading glasses and the blood pressure monitors, and I threw it into my basket without thinking much about it. I had been meaning to try one of those tests for a while. Most of my friends had already done it. My coworker Rachel had found out she was 17% Scandinavian and had not stopped talking about it for 3 months. She had, and I am not exaggerating this, framed the results. She had printed a pie chart from a DNA website, put it in a frame from a home goods store, and hung it above the couch in her apartment. I saw it every time I went to her place. My friend Denise had connected with a second cousin in Ireland she had never known existed, and they exchanged Christmas cards now and video called on holidays, and had even planned a trip to visit, which had not yet happened, but which they both talked about with genuine intention. Everyone I knew had done it and come back with a story. I was not expecting to find anything dramatic. I was not, honestly, expecting to find anything at all that particularly surprised me. I was adopted. I had always known I was adopted, and the fact of that adoption was the whole of what I expected the test to reveal. Perhaps a little more specificity about where my biological ancestors had come from. Perhaps some distant cousins I didn't know existed in countries I had never visited. Something to make for a conversation at a dinner party. Something to show Rachel, who would undoubtedly have something to say about whichever percentage was most unexpected. My parents, the Calloways, had told me I was adopted when I was 5 years old. I remember the day clearly in the way that certain days stay clear not because they were traumatic, but because they were significant. Because the body understands, even when the mind is still catching up, that something important is being said. It was a Sunday. The afternoon light came through the window over the kitchen sink and fell in a long rectangle across the linoleum floor. My mother, Margaret, had put a glass of apple juice in front of me, the good kind she kept for special occasions, and she sat across from me and took both of my hands in hers. Her hands were warm and dry and very still. My father Frank sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder touched hers, and he put his large hand over the back of mine and left it there. My mother had clearly thought carefully about what she was going to say. The words came out shaped, the way words come out when someone has rehearsed them until they have no sharp edges left. "You grew in someone else's tummy first," she said, "but you were always meant to be ours." That was the whole of it. That was the explanation she had prepared, and she delivered it with a gentleness so practiced that I did not cry. My father nodded. He did not add anything, because she had already said everything. I was 5. I did not fully understand what it meant. I had a vague awareness that something significant had just been told to me, because of the apple juice and the way they were sitting and the steadiness in my mother's voice, which was the steadiness of someone working to hold something. But I did not cry, and I was not afraid. And after a little while, I asked if we could watch television. As I grew older and came to understand what adoption meant, it settled into a comfortable place in my understanding of myself. A quiet fact, carried alongside all the other facts of my life without weight or friction. I was Sarah Calloway. I was adopted. I had red hair and freckles that neither of my parents had, which sometimes made strangers at the grocery store ask if I was theirs. And my mother would say yes with a directness that closed the question. I could not carry a tune, and my mother sang beautifully, in the kitchen and in the car and at church on the Sundays when we went, which was not every Sunday, but more than some families. I was left-handed in a right-handed family. My father held a pencil the way most people do, and my mother had beautiful penmanship in the cursive she had been taught in Catholic school. And I had learned early that there was simply a version of me that was different from them in certain ways, and that those differences were facts rather than problems. I had good parents. I want to be clear about this because it matters to everything that comes after. I had a warm home and a childhood in Phoenix that I look back on with something close to uncomplicated gratitude, which I understand is not everyone's experience of childhood, and which I do not take for granted. We lived in a neighborhood with wide streets and jacaranda trees that bloomed purple every spring, and the neighbors knew each other's names. And in summer, there were block parties where someone always had a speaker set up playing old country music, and the adults sat in lawn chairs until it was dark, and the children ran around until someone's mother called them in. I was happy there. I was genuinely happy. I did not spend much time wondering about where I came from, about the person who had given birth to me and whatever her reasons had been. Some adoptees feel that pull strongly. The need to find the missing piece, to locate the biological source. I understood that impulse. I never judged anyone for following it. I simply did not feel it in the same way. Or if I did feel something like it, it was quiet enough that I did not recognize it as a hunger. I had what I needed. I was not looking for more. I bought the kit. I registered it on the platform's website, which involved setting up an account and entering some basic information and agreeing to terms of service that I did not read fully, which is probably true of most people. I collected the sample on a Wednesday evening sitting at my kitchen table in my apartment, which felt more clinical than I expected and also faintly absurd, like an experiment I was conducting on myself. I sealed the package and mailed it back on a gray Saturday morning in late November, standing at the mailbox in front of my building in my coat and slippers, the sky the color of old pewter, my breath making small clouds in the cold air. Then I forgot about it entirely. I went to work the following Monday, and the Monday after that, and the Monday after that. I finished the pool supplies project and moved on to a campaign for a regional bank and then a rebrand for a restaurant group. I went to the gym when I felt like going, which averaged out to about twice a week. I had dinner with Denise on a Thursday and with Rachel and some other people from work on a Friday. I talked to my father Frank on Sunday evenings. He called at 6, always at 6, and we talked for 20 or 30 minutes about whatever was in his life that week. The Cardinals game, the weather, what he had cooked, what the neighbors were doing, whether he'd gone to the hardware store. Simple, reliable, warm. I had been having that call every Sunday for as long as I could remember, and I expected to keep having it, in that form, indefinitely. I lived my life, which was an ordinary life in the good way that ordinary means. Steady, familiar, mine. The email came on a Tuesday morning in early January. I was at my desk on the 4th floor of our building in downtown Phoenix. I had been with the firm for 6 years, and I knew that office the way you know a place you spend more of your waking hours in than anywhere else. I knew which chair at the conference table wobbled if you leaned back in it. I knew that the overhead lights buzzed slightly on the east side of the floor and that you stopped noticing it after a week. I knew that Rachel, who sat 12 feet to my left, kept a small succulent on her desk that she had named Gerald and that she talked to when she thought no one was listening. Brief encouraging remarks like "you're doing great," and that's a very healthy color. I knew that the coffee from the machine by the elevator tasted like it had been sitting in the machine since the machine was installed, and that the coffee from the place on the ground floor was reliably good, and that the difference in effort was 1 flight of stairs in 2 minutes, and I almost always took the stairs. I had a coffee in my left hand, the good kind, and I was examining a layout mock-up on my monitor. A client who sold pool supplies. I was trying to decide if the shade of blue they had requested was too similar to the blue their main competitor used, close enough to cause confusion. And if so, how to have that conversation with a client who had strong opinions about their brand color. My phone buzzed on the desk beside my keyboard. "Your DNA results are ready to view." I set down the coffee. I picked up the phone and clicked through to the platform app. I looked at the ethnicity breakdown first, which is what everyone does, because it is the most immediately legible and entertaining part of the result. Numbers and percentages and a colorful map with regions shaded in to show the rough geographic origins of your ancestors. 43% Irish and British Isles, 21% Southern European, 17% German and Central European, 8% Scandinavian, several smaller percentages distributed across Eastern Europe and the Iberian Peninsula. I turned my phone across to Rachel, who was close enough that I could extend it without getting up. I pointed to the Scandinavian number. She pointed at it too and made a slow, triumphant fist in the air, the gesture she had been making on behalf of Scandinavian ancestry since her own results in September. I turned the phone back and kept scrolling. I reached the section labeled DNA Matches. There is a hierarchy in how these platforms present your genetic relationships. At the top sits the category called Close Family, which represents the people with whom you share the most DNA. Parents, children, full siblings. Below that is first cousin, then second cousin. Then the increasingly numerous and increasingly distant matches that spread out like branches the further you go. Third cousins and fourth cousins and the various half-relationships that complicate the picture. Most people doing one of these tests for the first time find that their closest matches fall in the second or third cousin range. That is expected. That is normal. A first cousin match is considered meaningful, worth paying attention to, worth a message or a family tree comparison. A close family match is a different kind of finding entirely. At the very top of my DNA matches list, pinned to the top of the close family category the way the platform pins the most significant results, was a name I did not recognize. Linda Reyes. Below the name in the platform's gray text, estimated relationship, mother or half-sibling. I stared at that name for a long time. I did not move. I was aware, dimly, of the office around me. The low sound of keyboards, a phone ringing 2 desks away, Gerald the succulent sitting in his pot on Rachel's desk, the hum of the overhead lights on the east side of the floor. But all of it receded to a great distance. Something had happened in the center of my chest. Not pain, not quite fear. Something quieter than either. Something like the moment just before understanding arrives, when you are in the last second of not knowing and the knowing is already there, just on the other side of a door that has not yet opened. I had been told I was adopted. I had always known that a biological mother existed somewhere in the world. A woman had given birth to me. That woman was not Margaret Calloway. This was something I had accepted, without difficulty, a long time ago. But the category did not say distant biological relative. It said close family. And the estimated relationship said mother or half-sibling. Those were the 2 possibilities the algorithm had calculated based on the percentage of shared DNA, and both of them placed Linda Reyes at the nearest possible range of biological relationship, not a distant connection. Not someone whose connection to me would require genealogical research and creative interpretation. The closest possible category. I clicked on her profile. It was sparse. A small square photograph, the kind of image that is too small to read clearly. A woman with dark hair standing in front of what appeared to be a garden. The light green and warm. The details too compressed by the low resolution to make out her features. Her location was listed as Columbus, Ohio. She had joined the platform 3 years and 2 months earlier. There were no family trees attached, no additional photographs, no DNA circles or family groups that I could see. Just the profile and the location, and one thing in the About section. Looking for information about a daughter born in Columbus in 1989. If you think you might be connected to me, please reach out. I want to hear from you. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. A daughter born in Columbus in 1989. I was born in 1989. My entire life I had been told I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. I had a birth certificate I had held in my hands dozens of times. A document I had used to get my driver's license at 16, my passport at 22, my first job at 23 when HR needed my social security card and my birth certificate and a form of ID. It listed my birthplace as Phoenix, Arizona. It listed my mother as Margaret Ann Calloway. It listed my father as Frank Joseph Calloway. Those were my parents. Phoenix was where I was born. Those were the fixed facts of my origin, and I had never had any reason to question them. But Linda Reyes, who the DNA algorithm was telling me shared enough genetic material with me to be classified as my mother or a close sibling, was from Columbus, Ohio. And she was looking for a daughter born in Columbus in 1989. I closed the app. I put my phone face down on my desk. I sat looking at the pool supplies layout on my monitor without seeing it. I picked up my coffee and held it and set it down without drinking. Then I opened the app again. I sent Linda Reyes a message. Hi, my name is Sarah. I saw your profile and what you wrote. I think we should talk. I sent it. I put the phone face down again. I stared at the pool supplies. I did not tell anyone what I had found. Not Rachel, who would have looked up from Gerald immediately and wanted to help, who would have pulled her chair around to my side of the desk and started Googling things and meaning so much well that the meaning well would have taken up the whole room. Not Denise, who was careful and thoughtful and who also had a relationship with significant information that made it difficult for her to hold it quietly for more than 48 hours. Not my father. Especially not my father. I need to explain why. Because that choice, to sit with this alone, to not bring it to the person I would normally bring hard things to, came from a specific place. And that place is important to the story. My mother, Margaret Calloway, had died 2 years before I bought that DNA kit. Pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed on a Thursday in March, and I remember the day because I was at my desk at work when my phone rang, and I looked at the screen and saw her name, and I stepped out to the stairwell between the third and fourth floors to take the call, because the stairwell was where I went for phone calls I didn't want the office to hear. She told me in the voice she used when she had already done all the hard work of absorbing something before bringing it to me. Calm. Clear. She had always been like that. She processed things on her own first, organized them into a shape that was survivable, and then she gave them to me in that form rather than in the raw shape they had originally arrived. I had grown up receiving difficult information through her particular filter, and I had not always appreciated that while she was alive, and I very much appreciated it in the years after she was gone. She was diagnosed in March, and she was dead by August. 5 months. The months were both very long and very short simultaneously, which is a thing that can be true about time when something is ending. I was at her bedside at the end, holding her hand in a hospital room that smelled like the specific combination of antiseptic and artificial flowers that hospital rooms smell like. My father was on the other side of her. The machines recorded what they recorded, and the light came through the window in the late afternoon and fell across her blanket. And I thought about the light through the kitchen window when I was 5, and I held her hand. She was the one who knew my adoption story. She was the one who had made the arrangements, whatever those arrangements were. She was the one who kept the documents and knew the history and could have, if I had ever needed her to, explain the origin of Sarah Calloway in whatever detail was necessary. She was the one I would have called. She was gone. So when I found those words on Linda Reyes's profile, I could not call my mother and ask her to tell me what they meant. I could not call her and say, "There is a woman in Columbus, Ohio, and the DNA platform thinks she might be my mother, and she is looking for a daughter born in 1989, and I need you to explain to me why that is not what it appears to be." I could not have that conversation. She was in a cemetery in Phoenix, and the conversation was not available. I could only wait. I waited 4 days for Linda Reyes to respond. The 4 days were among the stranger 4 days of my adult life, because on the surface they were entirely ordinary. I went to work on Wednesday and resolved the pool supplies blue problem by finding a slightly warmer version of the shade that differentiated it sufficiently from the competitor. I went to the gym on Thursday. I had dinner with a friend on Friday evening at a Mexican restaurant we liked, and I ate a full meal and had 2 drinks and laughed at the things that were said and contributed to the conversation in a normal way. And the entire time, some quiet part of me was elsewhere, in a room I had not entered yet, in a conversation that had not yet happened. I woke up at 3 in the morning on the second night and lay on my back in the dark of my bedroom and stared at the ceiling and thought about the words. Looking for information about a daughter born in Columbus in 1989. I turned them over and over. I examined them from different angles. I tried to find an interpretation that explained the DNA result, and those words in a way that did not require the conclusion that was forming, steadily and inescapably in the back of my mind. I was not successful. By the 4th day, I had stopped trying. The message came on a Saturday morning. I was on my couch in my apartment, which faces east, and the morning light was coming in through the windows, the thin, clear light of a Phoenix January that is not warm but is bright, and the television was on with the sound low, a cooking program I was not watching. I had a bowl of cereal in my hands. My phone was on the cushion beside me. It lit up. A notification from the DNA platform. "Hello, my name is Linda Reyes. I have been on this platform for 3 years, checking this account every single day. And this is the first message I have received that I believe may be what I have been looking for. I don't want to assume. I am trying very hard not to assume. But I would like to speak with you, if you are willing. Would you be comfortable talking by phone? Whenever you're ready. There is no rush." I set the cereal bowl on the coffee table. I sat with the phone in both hands and read the message twice. I typed, "Yes, I'm ready now if you are." She replied in under 2 minutes. "Yes, please call me." I called her. The phone rang twice. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she had been sitting with her phone in her hand. "Hello?" Her voice was careful in the specific way of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a specific thing to happen and is now trying not to let the waiting collapse into them all at once. "Hello?" I said. "This is Sarah." A silence. I could hear her breathing. Slow, deliberate. Then she said, "How old are you?" I told her. A longer silence. The kind of silence that has specific weight. that you can feel pressing against both sides of a phone line. Then she said, "I need to tell you something. I need you to let me tell you the whole thing before you respond. Is that okay?" "Yes," I said, and she told me. Linda Reyes had grown up in Cincinnati, the younger of two daughters, in a house where her mother had lived for 30 years, on a street where the neighbors knew each other, and the elm trees were old enough to arch over the road in summer and make a kind of green tunnel. She had been close to her older sister, and close to her mother, and close to her grandmother Elena, her mother's mother, who had died when Linda was 12, and whose absence she had felt for years afterward like a missing tooth. The tongue returning to the space, finding the gap, cataloging the loss again and again. She had moved to Columbus in her early 20s for a job, a receptionist position at a mid-sized insurance company downtown, the kind of company that fills entire floors of office buildings in Midwestern cities, that processes claims and manages accounts and employs hundreds of people who take their lunch to a break room and know the names of the people in adjacent cubicles. She had built a life in Columbus the way young people build lives in cities. Slowly, incrementally, one connection at a time. A neighborhood that became familiar. A handful of friendships that became genuine. Routines that became comfortable. She had been with a man for almost 2 years. Someone she had met through a mutual friend. Someone she had trusted. Someone she had believed in with the specific earnestness of a person in their early 20s who has not yet learned at their own cost what it costs to believe in the wrong person. When she told him she was pregnant, he went quiet in the way that some men go quiet. A withdrawal that was not dramatic, not angry, not even clearly final, just a slow receding, a thinning of presence, until one day he was simply not there. He was gone within a week. She did not hear from him again. She made her arrangements. She called her mother in Cincinnati and told her, and her mother drove up the following weekend and they sat at Linda's kitchen table and talked through what came next. She went to her OB appointments alone or with her sister, who made the drive from Cincinnati when she could. She prepared as well as she could prepare. She was going to have this baby and she was going to raise her, and she understood that this was going to be hard, and she was going to do it anyway. She had her daughter at Columbus General Hospital on a Wednesday morning in October of 1989. The labor was long, 15 hours from the first real contractions to the end, which is not uncommon for a first delivery, but which is also 15 hours of work that the body does not easily forget. The baby was healthy. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Dark hair, dense and surprising on a newborn. A round, serious face. Linda had looked at her and thought, absurdly and also not absurdly at all, that she looked like she was already thinking about something. She named her Elena, after her grandmother, after the woman whose absence she had been carrying for 12 years, as if naming her daughter after someone she had loved and lost was a way of returning something to the world that the world had taken. Elena was placed in the hospital nursery while Linda recovered in her room. Linda's mother was driving up from Cincinnati and would not arrive until evening. Linda was alone in the recovery room in the specific exhaustion of new motherhood. Not the ordinary exhaustion of a difficult day, but something that goes deeper, that has a different quality, that feels like the body has performed a function it was designed to perform and is now resting in the particular way of something that has just done something enormous. She slept. When she woke, a nurse she had not seen before came into the room. The nurse's face was doing something specific. It was calm, carefully calm, in the way of someone who has been told to be calm, who is working to keep their expression from communicating something before the words do. She said there was a situation with the nursery. She said they were looking into it. She asked Linda not to be alarmed. Elena was not where she was supposed to be. The initial assumption, the assumption that everyone in that hospital reached for and held on to with both hands for as long as they possibly could, was that there had been an error. A miscommunication between the day shift and the evening shift. A cart taken to the wrong room. A baby moved for an examination that hadn't been properly logged. These things happened in hospitals. They were rare, but they happened and they always resolved. Always turned out to be a documentation failure or a communication breakdown. Never anything worse. The assumption lasted 90 minutes. At 90 minutes, the hospital went into lockdown. Every exit was secured. Every staff member on every floor was contacted. Security footage was being pulled. Administrators who had not been on the floor that day were being called at home. 3 hours after Elena was last documented alive in the nursery, Columbus police were on the maternity ward. By the time the sun had gone down outside the hospital windows, the FBI had been contacted because all of the other explanations had been considered and discarded, and what was left. The thing that no one in that building had been able to say out loud yet, but that everyone now understood, was the thing that had no other name. Someone had come into the hospital. Someone had walked into Columbus General Hospital in the middle of the afternoon, walked past the nurse's station, entered the newborn nursery, picked up a baby who was 3 days old and who had been named Elena after someone her mother had loved, and walked out of the building with her. The investigation was immediate and serious and produced almost nothing. Surveillance cameras in 1989 were not the cameras we have now. The technology that existed covered the main lobbies and elevator banks and certain corridors, but not every hallway. Not the specific path someone would need to take to reach the nursery without being clearly recorded on a face-forward camera. What footage existed was poor quality, shot on aging equipment that had not been updated, difficult to enhance beyond a point where it was useful. Every staff member on the floor that day was interviewed. Every person who had signed the visitor log was contacted. Every lead was followed to its end. From all of that, one partial description emerged. A woman in scrubs had been noticed near the nursery at some point during the afternoon window when Elena disappeared. Several staff members mentioned her independently, which gave the description some weight, though the details did not entirely align. Medium height, dark hair, or possibly a darker blonde. Middle-aged, by which different witnesses meant different things. She had been calm. She had not hurried. She had spoken to at least 2 nurses in a friendly and easy way. She had seemed to know how hospitals worked, had used terminology correctly, had moved through the ward with the ease of someone who was familiar with that kind of environment. She had looked like she belonged there. She had not signed the visitor log. No one had taken her name. No one had asked who she was there to see or what she was doing. She had come and she had gone, and by the time anyone understood what had happened, she was not findable. No charges were filed. No arrest was ever made. Elena Reyes remained on the FBI's list of missing children, an active case because infant abduction cases in the federal system do not close until they are resolved. But investigations go cold when the leads run out, not with any formal declaration, not with anyone deciding that the search is over, just with the phone calls becoming less frequent and the file sitting untouched in a cabinet for longer and longer stretches. And so it was with Elena's case. The years went by. Linda Reyes spent the next 30 years looking for her daughter. She submitted her DNA to every genealogy platform that offered a family-finding service from the moment those services became available, and continued submitting to each new platform as they emerged, because the databases grew over time and a search that had produced nothing 1 year might produce something 3 years later when the user base had expanded. She maintained contact with the FBI agent assigned to Elena's case, a relationship that turned over twice as agents retired and were replaced, each time requiring her to reestablish the relationship and re-explain the history to someone new. She checked the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's database the way some people check the news, habitually, looking for anything that corresponded to what Elena might look like at each age as the years accumulated. She attended a support group for parents of missing children for 6 years and then stopped attending when the attending became something that held her in grief rather than something that helped her move through it, because she had learned the difference between the two. She kept that profile on the DNA platform active. She updated the account every few months to make sure it was still visible. She rewrote the message in the About section twice over the 3 years she had been on the platform, each time making it a little clearer, a little more precise. The final version read, "Looking for information about a daughter born in Columbus in 1989. If you think you might be connected to me, please reach out. I want to hear from you." She checked the account every morning before she left for work and every evening when she got home. For 3 years, she checked it and found nothing. Then I sent her a message. I sat on my couch with the phone pressed against my ear, and I listened to all of this without speaking. I had promised I would hear the whole thing before I said anything, and I kept the promise because it was not difficult to keep. I did not have words yet. I was listening in the way you listen when what you are hearing is rearranging things inside you as it arrives, fitting itself into the structure of what you know and changing the shape of that structure as it goes. At some point, I turned the television off without looking at it. At some point, I moved the cereal bowl from my lap to the coffee table. Other than those things, I did not move. When Linda finished, the silence between us lasted a long time. I was aware of my apartment around me. The morning light still coming through the east windows, the street sounds from outside, the faint mechanical hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, and all of it felt strange. The ordinary furniture of my ordinary life, sitting there unchanged while everything was changing. She said, "Are you still there?" "I'm here," I said. She said, "I want to be careful. I am trying very hard not to assume. But the result?" "I know," I said. She said, "The platform says close family, mother or half-sibling." "I know," I said again. "I do not have any other children," she said. "After Elena, I could not. I wanted to. Eventually, I thought I wanted to. But I could not go through a pregnancy again knowing what I now knew about how fast something could be taken from you, about how little warning there was, about how completely and how quickly a thing you love can be gone. So there are no other children. Which means if the platform says mother or half-sibling and there are no other children, then we know what it means." I said. "Yes," she said quietly. "We know what it means." A long silence. She said, "Your parents told you that you were adopted?" "Yes." She said, "Did they tell you where you were born?" "Phoenix," I said. "My birth certificate says Phoenix, Arizona." A pause. Long and waited. She said, "That's not where you were born." "I know," I said. "I think I've known that for the last 4 days. I want to describe what it feels like to have the ground move under you while you are sitting still. It does not feel like the movie version of that moment. There is no music. There is no gasp, no hands to the face, no cinematic moment of collapse or revelation. What it actually feels like is quieter and more total than any of that. It feels like standing in a room you have lived in your entire life. A room you know so thoroughly you could navigate it in complete darkness, could find every piece of furniture, could tell you by memory the sound each floorboard makes and where the window lets in a draft in winter. And realizing for the first time that one of the walls is not a wall. It is a door. It has always been a door. You can see, now that you're looking, the seam where the frame meets the plaster. The faint line that you have looked at 1,000 times without registering what it was. You are simply only now looking at it directly. I had been given a story about myself. The story was, you were adopted. A woman gave birth to you and could not, for reasons of her own that were never fully specified to me, keep you. And so your parents, the Calloways, Margaret and Frank, the people who showed up to everything and made the tamales and sat with you through the appendix and came to every soccer game and taught you, badly, to parallel park, became your parents. That was the shape of my origin. I had carried it for my entire life, and it had not felt like a burden because it was simply what was true. But if Linda Reyes was telling me what the DNA platform was also telling me, and the platform said that with a certainty expressed in the category close family, mother, or half-sibling, then the actual story was something different, something I had no previous frame for. The actual story was, a woman in Columbus, Ohio, gave birth to me on a Wednesday in October of 1989. She was alone in her recovery room. She named me Elena. 3 days later, while she slept, someone came into the hospital and walked into the nursery and took me. That person brought me to Phoenix. She told everyone, including the man she was married to, that she had made arrangements. She raised me in the house with the jacaranda tree and the block parties and the kitchen window that caught the afternoon light. She came to the school plays. She held my hands across the table when I was 5 and told me with tremendous care, with words she had practiced until all the edges were smooth, that I was adopted. I was not adopted. I was taken. I need to tell you something about Margaret Calloway, because you will not understand the rest of this story unless you understand something about her first. She was a good woman. I am not saying that reflexively, not the way people reach for goodness as the only available word when talking about the dead, as if the state of being deceased confers a decency that must be acknowledged regardless of what the person actually was. I am saying it because when I measure her against every standard I had available to me during the 33 years I knew her, she measures well. She was patient with me in the way that genuinely patient people are patient. Not the tight, suppressed patience of someone managing an impulse, but the real thing, the kind that comes from actually finding the person in front of you interesting enough to wait for. She was warm. She was present. She was, in the ways that counted, there. She did not miss things. She came to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, including the ones in July when the Phoenix heat was punishing and the bleachers were metal and absorbed and radiated the sun like a secondary heat source. She sat in those bleachers in a wide-brimmed hat and a long-sleeved shirt with the other parents, and she brought orange slices in a Tupperware container that she passed along the row. She did not complain about the heat. She was simply there. She taught me her mother's tamale recipe, standing beside me in the kitchen, patient with my failures, amused by them, making the corrections without impatience. The recipe required a level of attention and tactile memory that took me several attempts to approximate, and she never made me feel that I was slow to learn it, never made me feel anything other than that the learning itself was the pleasure. My versions have never been quite as good as hers were. I have accepted this. She sat with me on the couch when I was sick with the specific attentiveness of a person who could have been elsewhere and chose not to be. She watched whatever I wanted to watch, including during a particularly bad flu when I was 19 and home from college for a week. 6 episodes in a row of a reality television program about competitive cake decorating that she had absolutely no investment in and that she watched with complete apparent interest, making occasional thoughtful comments about the structural engineering of the cakes that I am nearly certain she improvised because she had nothing real to say about competitive cake decorating and did not want me to feel like a burden. She was my mother. She sat across from me at the kitchen table when I was 5 years old and held my hands and told me I was adopted. And she got the words so right, she calibrated the gentleness so precisely that I did not cry. I have thought about that a great deal in the months since I discovered what I discovered. She had prepared those words. She had thought carefully about how to say something true while also protecting me from something else that was also true. She was good at that. She was good at constructing things that were true and survivable at the same time. She had been practicing it for a long time. She was my mother. And she had taken me from a hospital when I was 3 days old. Both of those things were true. I sat on the couch in my apartment after Linda's phone call, and I tried to put them in the same frame, and I could not. The woman who sat in the bleachers in the July heat and the woman who walked into a hospital nursery were not a person I had a frame for. I did not have a way of seeing them as the same person. But they were. I knew they were. And I was going to have to find a way to hold that. I did not call my father the following Sunday. He called at 6, as always. I sat on my couch and watched my phone screen show his name and light up and then stop lighting up and go dark. I had never, in my memory as an adult, intentionally let a call from my father go to voicemail. Not once. The not answering felt like a small, deliberate harm, like pressing on a bruise to establish that it was still there and still hurt. I listened to the message later. He had made the pasta that Sunday, the one he made almost every Sunday evening in the cold months. Italian sausage and canned San Marzano tomatoes and far too much garlic, a recipe he had made for 30 years that I had eaten at that table my entire childhood, and that smelled, when I thought of it, like Sunday evenings and comfort. He had watched the Cardinals game, and they had been good in the first half and not in the second, which was not unusual. He said he hoped I was doing something fun. He said to call when I got a chance. He said it the way he always said it, which was with genuine warmth filtered through a reserve that was simply part of how he expressed himself, care that arrived in the details of what he had cooked and what he had watched, rather than in the direct language of feeling. I listened to the whole message. I sat with my phone in my lap for a while afterward. I called Linda instead. She answered on the first ring. She had not slept, she said. Not since we had spoken. She had spent the night and most of the following day sitting with what was happening, trying to allow it to be real, trying to let herself believe it after 30 years of hoping and being wrong and hoping again. I have questions, I told her. Ask me, she said. Ask me anything you want to know. I have been waiting to answer these questions for a very long time. I asked her what the investigation had actually found, in all the years that followed, what they had determined about the woman who had taken Elena, whether they had ever come close. She said that for the first several years they had found almost nothing of substance. The partial description existed. The woman in scrubs, medium height, dark or possibly darker blonde hair, middle-aged, confident in a hospital setting. But a description that vague in a hospital context was nearly useless. Everyone in a hospital looks like they could be a nurse or a technician or an administrator. The composites that had been generated from witness descriptions differed from each other in the ways that descriptions from different witnesses always differ. The investigation was active and serious in the first year, and then less active in the second, and then less active still. The way investigations become less active when the trail has cooled and the other cases accumulate, and the available resources must be distributed across all of them. Then something happened in 2003. 14 years after Elena disappeared, a woman named Dorothy Keene contacted the FBI's Columbus field office. Dorothy had worked as a charge nurse on the maternity ward at Columbus General from 1986 until 1994. She had been interviewed in the immediate aftermath of the abduction, in those first frantic weeks when everyone who had been in that hospital in October of 1989 was asked everything they could remember. She had told them what she knew, which at the time was not much. She had not witnessed anything that seemed relevant, had not seen anything unusual, had nothing to add to the picture that was being assembled. But in the summer of 2003, Dorothy had been watching a true crime television program that featured several unsolved infant abduction cases, and Elena's case was among them. The program showed photographs and composite sketches and recreations. And while Dorothy was watching, something had shifted in her memory. Not a sudden, clear recollection, but something subtler. A sense of recognition. A feeling that something she had seen years ago was being referenced by what she was watching. An itch that became gradually more specific as she sat with it over the following days. She remembered a visitor. In the week before Elena disappeared, Dorothy had seen a woman on the maternity ward whom she did not recognize as a patient or a family member or a staff member. The woman had said she was visiting a friend who had recently delivered. Dorothy had not thought much of it at the time. Visitors came to the maternity ward constantly for exactly that reason. But this woman had stayed longer than most visitors and had come on 2 separate days during that week. And both times she had chatted with the nurses in the easy conversational way of someone who was comfortable in that environment. Not nervous. Not watchful. Not performing anything. Simply comfortable. She knew things, Dorothy told the FBI. She used the right terms, asked questions in the right way, referenced procedures and protocols in the way of someone who had experience in a medical context. She moved through the ward without hesitation, without looking at signs to orient herself, without any of the slight disorientation that most civilians have when they navigate a hospital floor for the first time. She looked like she belonged there. That was the phrase Dorothy used, and it was the phrase that had stayed with Linda for 20 years because it was the phrase that explained how it had happened. It had happened because someone had made themselves belong, had learned or already knew how to make a hospital ward read her as a person with a legitimate reason to be there. The FBI worked with Dorothy extensively. A forensic artist spent several sessions with her producing a composite sketch, hand-drawn in the style of 2003 rather than the digital reconstruction technology that exists now, based on a memory that was already 14 years old when the sessions took place. The resulting image was a pencil drawing of a woman with medium-length wavy hair, a rounded face, defined cheekbones, and an expression that the artist had interpreted from Dorothy's description as a slight, easy smile. The smile of someone who has nothing to hide and knows it. They sent the composite to law enforcement contacts in surrounding states. They ran it through available databases. They followed the leads it generated. None of them led anywhere that led anywhere else. The woman Dorothy remembered was never identified. I asked Linda to send me the composite. She paused. A brief pause, the kind that contains understanding. She asked, "Are you thinking what I think you might be thinking?" I said, "I don't know yet. I just want to see it." The image arrived by email 40 minutes later. A scan of the original paper document. The paper itself yellowed at the edges in the way of documents that have been handled many times over many years. The pencil lines clear despite the aging. The woman in the drawing had wavy or loosely curled hair of medium length, dark or possibly a medium brown. A rounded, pleasant face. High cheekbones. The corners of her mouth turned up in the expression the artist had constructed from Dorothy's description. Not a full smile. Not a performed smile. But the natural resting expression of someone who is at ease, who expects the world around them to receive them as they are presenting themselves to it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I got up from my desk and went to the shelf in my living room where I kept the framed photographs. I had not decorated aggressively. My apartment was not a person's apartment covered in evidence of a rich social life. Not a wall of smiling group photos from events. But I had a shelf, and on it were the photographs that mattered to me. My parents in front of the Grand Canyon on a trip we took when I was 11, both of them squinting against the sun and smiling. My mother and me at my college graduation, her arm around me, my cap slightly crooked, and one that I had taken from the box of old photographs after my mother died and put in a frame because I did not want to keep it in a box. My mother, young, standing outside a building whose exterior I had never been able to identify. A dark coat, her hair a little longer than she usually wore it in my childhood, and slightly wavy. She was smiling at whoever was taking the photograph, and the smile was the natural, unposed smile of a person who was relaxed and entirely at ease. I held that photograph next to my phone. I looked at the composite on the screen. I looked at the photograph in my hand. I looked at the composite again. I am a graphic designer, not a forensic image analyst, and I am aware of the difference. A pencil composite drawn from one person's 14-year-old memory is not a photograph, is not evidence, is not a match in any legal or scientific sense. I am not claiming that it was. I am not qualified to claim that it was. But I am trained to look at images carefully. I am trained to notice proportions, the relationship between elements, the specific quality of a face's expression, and how that quality is carried in the positioning of the features. I looked at the cheekbones in both images. I looked at the way the mouth was set in both images. I looked at the ease in both images, the particular quality of ease that belongs to someone who does not expect to be questioned, who moves through the world with the assurance of someone who has never had reason not to. I thought about what Dorothy Keene had said. She knew things. She used the right terms. She moved through the ward without hesitation. My mother had worked as a medical secretary for 11 years before I was born. She had worked at 2 different practices, one of which was adjacent to a hospital. She had worked alongside doctors and nurses for over a decade. She knew the terminology. She knew how hospitals were organized. She knew how to walk into a medical space and belong in it, because she had done it every day for 11 years. I put the photograph back on the shelf and stood in my living room for a while. I called my father on the following Tuesday evening. He answered on the second ring. He said he was glad I called. He had been mildly concerned after Sunday. I said I was sorry. I had been dealing with something and I should have called sooner. He asked if everything was okay. I said I needed to ask him something and I needed him to answer me honestly. A pause. Brief. Brief enough that someone who did not know him would not register it as meaningful. But I had been listening to this man's pauses for 33 years, and this one was the kind that contains something already thought about, something that has been sitting in the back of a mind waiting to be addressed. He said, "Okay." I said, "Where was I born?" He said, "Sarah, you know where you were born. What is—" I said, "Dad, please, I need you to tell me the truth." A longer silence. I heard his breathing. I heard a sound that might have been him setting something down. When you know a person as well as I knew my father, you can read things in the spaces around their words the way you read a face. Not the meaning of the words, but the thing that exists in the space the words do not fill. In his silence, I heard something I had never heard from him before. Not evasion, not guilt exactly, but the specific sound of a person deciding. Of a person standing at the last moment before a thing becomes said, making the choice about whether to say it. He said, "How did you find out?" And the entire room went very quiet around me. My father told me that he did not know. He said it that night on the phone, and he said it in the weeks that followed, and he said it to the FBI agents who spoke with him in February, and he has said it every time the subject has come up since. He did not know what Margaret had done. He did not know the real origin of the baby that had come home with his wife in November of 1989. He believed what she had told him, which was that she had made an arrangement. A private arrangement, outside the formal adoption system, the kind that happened sometimes in those years. A woman who could not keep her baby. A couple who wanted one. An intermediary who made the connection. Not agency processed. Not formally documented. But not illegal, she had said. Simply private. He had not asked questions. He was a man who had wanted a child with the specific depth that comes from wanting something for a very long time. He and Margaret had tried for 8 years. 8 years is a long time to want something. Long enough to change the shape of the wanting. To make it into something that is both still the original desire and also something larger and more painful and more insistent. When Margaret came home with me, when she placed me in his arms in their bedroom in Phoenix with the curtains drawn against the November sun, when she said she is ours now, he had held me. He had looked at my face and held me, and he had not asked. I have turned that over many times. He did not take me. He did not plan anything. He was not a knowing participant in what was done. He was deceived by the person he trusted most in the world, by the person he had built his entire adult life alongside, by the person who knew better than anyone what he needed and who used that knowledge, I think, not out of cruelty, but out of the specific desperation that had been building in both of them for 8 years of not having what they had wanted. But he did not ask. He stood at the edge of a thing that had irregularities, that had the shape of something that should have had questions attached to it, and he chose, consciously or not, deliberately or through the softer mechanism of simply not looking, not to ask. And in the space of that choice, a woman named Linda Reyes was in a hospital room in Columbus, waking from an exhausted sleep and being told by a nurse with a carefully controlled face that there was a situation, that her daughter was not where she was supposed to be. He did not ask. And I have been working out what to do with that ever since. I contacted the FBI in January. The initial call went to the Phoenix field office, where I was connected with a special agent named Cora Ballard. She was probably in her early 40s, and she had the particular quality of professionalism that FBI agents who work child-related cases seem to develop. Calm without being cold, efficient without being impersonal. Clearly someone who had heard difficult things before and had learned how to hold them without being overwhelmed by them. She did not express surprise at what I described. She said that DNA testing platforms had changed cold case investigations significantly, that discoveries like the one I was describing were happening with increasing frequency as the databases grew large enough that unlikely matches became statistically inevitable. She was thorough. She asked for everything I had. The full DNA platform report with the underlying data, not just the summary page. My birth certificate. Photographs of Margaret Calloway across different years, with an emphasis on anything from the late 1980s. Whatever records I had from my early childhood. Vaccination cards, any documents my parents had kept from the first months of my life. She asked about the circumstances of my mother's death and about the estate, whether any documents had been found in clearing the house that seemed unusual or unexplained. I sent everything I had and told her where to find what I did not have. She told me the matter would be referred to the FBI's Crimes Against Children Unit for formal investigation, and that the original 1989 case file for Elena Reyes would be pulled and reviewed in conjunction with the DNA findings. She reminded me, carefully, that the woman who had taken me was deceased, which meant that whatever the investigation determined, there would be no criminal prosecution. The process that followed would be focused on establishing the facts of the case officially, correcting my identity documentation, and providing closure and whatever civil remedies existed for Linda Reyes and her family. She said, "I want you to know that even without the possibility of prosecution, this investigation is worth completing. What was done to you was a federal crime, and the woman who spent 30 years looking for you deserves to know what happened and to have it confirmed officially." I said, "That is the reason I called." The DNA confirmation from the FBI's own laboratory analysis, conducted under formal evidentiary protocols using samples from both Linda and myself, came 6 weeks after my initial contact with Special Agent Ballard. The report was 62 pages of forensic genetics and statistical analysis, and I read every page of it. The language was precise in the way that scientific legal documents are precise, careful not to overstate, careful to express certainty only where certainty had been established. The expression of certainty that the report used at the end of its analysis was a probability of 99.998%. Mother and daughter. I was Elena Reyes. I had been Elena Reyes from the Wednesday morning in October of 1989 when a woman who was in her early 20s and alone and exhausted had looked at a dark-haired baby with a serious face and named her after her grandmother. I had been Elena Reyes when I was put into someone else's arms in a hospital in Columbus. I had been Elena Reyes when I was driven across state lines to a house in Phoenix. I had been Elena Reyes sitting at a kitchen table with apple juice and afternoon light while someone told me, gently and with tremendous care, the story that was not the story. I did not know yet what to do with that name. Elena Reyes. I turned it over in my mind the way you turn over a word in a language you are beginning to learn. A word whose meaning you understand intellectually, but that hasn't yet settled into the part of you that recognizes things as true. Elena Reyes. The name on the missing persons report. The name on the FBI case file that had remained technically open for 33 years. A file that had sat in a cabinet getting no new entries while a woman in Columbus checked a DNA platform every morning and every evening and found nothing. I was Sarah Calloway. I had always been Sarah Calloway. I was also Elena Reyes. I did not know in January how to be both of those things at once. I did not know if it was possible to be both of those things at once in any coherent way. But I was beginning to understand that the question of how to be both was the actual work now. Not the investigation, not the documentation, not the amendments to my identity records that would slowly proceed through the systems that process such things. Those were the procedural elements, and they would take time and they would resolve. What I mean by the actual work is the other kind. The kind that does not take place in a federal investigation or a court record or a DNA laboratory. The kind that takes place in the space between things, in the 3 in the morning of it, in the ordinary moments of a regular day when something surfaces and you have to find somewhere to put it. The FBI formally closed the kidnapping case in March with an official finding that Margaret Ann Calloway was the individual responsible for the abduction of Elena Reyes from Columbus General Hospital on the date in question in October of 1989. The finding was based on the DNA confirmation, the forensic analysis that compared the composite sketch produced in 2003 with photographs of Margaret Calloway from the relevant period, the testimony of Dorothy Keene, additional interviews with hospital staff members who were still reachable, and documentary evidence that investigators located in the weeks following my initial contact. The documentary evidence was a motel registration card in the archives of a roadside motel 2 miles from Columbus General Hospital, a motel that had changed ownership twice since 1989 and no longer operated under the same name but had maintained its paper records in storage. Investigators found a registration card from October of 1989. A guest had stayed for 4 days. The motel was 2 miles from the hospital. The card was filled out by hand in the style of paper registrations from that era. A small rectangle of cardstock with lines for name and address and dates of stay. The name written on the card was Margaret Calloway. That card had been in a box, in storage. 34 years. Margaret Calloway died in August, 2 years before I bought the DNA kit at the pharmacy on the way home from work. She died in the house in Phoenix, in the room where the afternoon light came through the window the same way it had come through every room in that house my whole life, with Frank on one side of her bed and me on the other. She died believing, I think, that what she had done was unfindable, that the motel record was lost or destroyed, that the composite sketch looked enough like nobody in particular to be useless, that the years had done their work and the trail was cold enough to stay cold. She was wrong about the motel record. She was wrong about the composite and the forensic comparisons that could be made. And she was wrong, in the most fundamental way, about the DNA. She could not have anticipated the DNA. In 1989, the idea of a consumer genealogy platform with tens of millions of users, a searchable database that could connect a mother and a daughter across 33 years and 2 states through the submission of 2 saliva samples, would have been science fiction. She could not have planned for it. She could not have seen it coming. She had gotten away with it for 33 years. And then I walked into a pharmacy on a Thursday in November and spent $29 and she stopped getting away with it. I flew to Columbus in March. I booked the flight 3 times before I took it. The first booking I changed after 2 days, telling myself I needed more time, more clarity, a better sense of what I was walking toward. The second booking I changed after 1 day, because the reason I had given myself the first time was still available and I used it again. The third booking I made and then closed the laptop before I could change it. And 2 weeks later, I packed a bag and got in a rideshare to the airport in the pre-dawn dark and sat in a terminal seat with a bad coffee and watched the departures board. I had been talking to Linda for 2 months by then. Video calls, most Sunday evenings, the time we had settled on together without formally settling on it, the way regular things get established between people. She had told me about her job at the library, about the patrons she had known for years, about the particular satisfaction of reference work, which is the work of helping people find what they are looking for, and which I had come to understand, without either of us naming it, was not an accident as a career choice. She had shown me her garden in February, walking through it with her phone while the beds were bare, and the greenhouse held the seedlings she was starting for spring, narrating everything with the particular fluency of someone who loves what they are narrating. I had told her about my work, about color and proportion, about the specific satisfaction of making something that communicates exactly what it means to communicate. And I had found her to be the kind of listener who asks the questions that extend a conversation rather than the ones that redirect it. I liked her. That is a simple way of saying something that is not simple, but it is the truest way I can say it. I liked her. Across a video call, across the complicated geography of what had happened and what it meant, I simply liked the person she was. But a video call is not the same as a room. And I did not know, sitting on the plane to Columbus, what a room with her in it would feel like. She was at the edge of the arrivals area when I came through the doors from baggage claim. I saw her before she saw me. Green coat, the one I had seen on video calls, the color of old bottle glass, smaller than she looked on a screen. I had somehow estimated her height wrong from the proportions of the frame, and the actual her standing in the actual airport was a recalibration, a slight shift in the mental image I had constructed of her. Silver dark hair, cut short. She was holding her purse with both hands in front of her, not fidgeting, just holding it, the way people hold things when staying still requires effort. Then she saw me. She went very still. Not the stillness of someone frozen, not shock, but the stillness of someone who has been in motion for 33 years, who has been in the constant motion of searching and hoping and losing hope and finding it again, and who has suddenly, finally stopped. I walked toward her. She said my name. Elena. Said it quietly and with tremendous care. The way you say something you have been saying in private for so long that saying it aloud to the person it belongs to feels like a different kind of speaking entirely. I said, "You can call me Sarah, if it's easier." She shook her head. She said, "I've been saying Elena for 33 years. I don't think I can stop now." I said, "Then don't." She put her arms around me, and I let her and I held on too. And we stood in the arrivals area while Columbus moved around us. The announcements and the other people and the sound of wheels on tile, and neither of us said anything for a long time. We just stood there in the middle of it all, and it was the strangest and the most ordinary thing that has ever happened to me at the same time. There are things I want to tell you about Linda Reyes. She is a librarian. She has worked at the Columbus Public Library for 18 years, in the reference section of the main branch, the part of a library where people bring the questions they don't know how to ask anywhere else. The questions that don't have obvious search terms. The questions that require someone who knows how information is organized and where things are kept, and how to find what someone is looking for when they aren't sure themselves exactly what that is. She is, by all accounts, very good at this. The people who work with her speak about her the way people speak about someone who has found the right place for themselves, with the ease that comes from long practice and genuine fit. She is careful with words. It is one of the first things I noticed about her, in those earliest phone calls and video calls, and it has remained true every time we have spoken since. She does not rush sentences. She does not fill silence just to fill it. She thinks before she speaks, and she says what she means when she says it, without ornament, without softening that isn't necessary. I have come to understand that this is not reserve. She is not withholding. It is precision. She has spent her professional life in the service of precision, of finding the right information and presenting it in the right form, and that habit of mind has shaped how she speaks about everything. She lives in a house on a quiet street in the eastern part of Columbus, a house she bought 12 years ago and has made genuinely hers, the way people make houses theirs through the slow accumulation of decisions about what goes where and what colors and what to hang on which wall. The porch catches the afternoon light in a way she describes as the reason she bought the house, which I understand completely. The vegetable garden in the backyard is extensive and meticulously organized, raised beds with careful spacing, a composting system she maintains with genuine interest, a small greenhouse she built herself 3 years ago from a kit that she describes as a humbling experience that she would do again immediately. The tomatoes grow on the east side because the light is better there. There are roses along the back fence that came from cuttings her neighbor gave her years ago, and that return every spring without any encouragement. There is a chair near the roses. She sits there sometimes in the evening, she told me, when the light is the right kind. She never married. She told me this early, in the same careful way she tells me most significant things, preparing the context before the thing, giving the frame before the picture, so that when the thing arrives, I have somewhere to place it. After Elena disappeared, she said, she had found that she could not trust the future in the way that building a life with another person requires. She could not hold something she loved and believe it would still be there. She had tried twice with two different people, both of them good people she thinks about with warmth and without bitterness. And both times she had found that some essential part of her was not available for the kind of presence a real relationship requires, because some essential part of her was always elsewhere, always in the case, always listening for the phone. She had built a life anyway. That is the thing I want to be clear about. She had not simply waited. She had built a life around the waiting, around the work she was good at, around her sister and her nieces and the friends she had made over 30 years in Columbus, around the garden and the house and the chair near the roses. It was not the life she had imagined when she was in her early 20s holding a baby in a hospital room in Columbus, but it was a real life and it was genuinely hers, and she was not asking me to grieve for it. She was simply telling me the truth of it, which is what she does. I met her sister and her nieces on the second day of my visit. They came from Cincinnati on a Saturday morning, all three of them in the same car, and they brought pastries from a bakery the sister loved, and they filled Linda's kitchen with conversation and warmth, and the particular energy of a family gathering that is simultaneously completely ordinary and completely not ordinary at all. The sister looked at me with the specific attention of someone who is confirming something she already knew was going to be true. The older niece was quiet and watchful in a way that I recognized as Linda's quality in a younger face. The younger niece was more like the sister, direct, quick to laugh, comfortable with strangers in the easy way that some people simply are. We sat around Linda's kitchen table for 4 hours and we drank coffee and ate pastries and talked about everything and nothing, and I found that I was not as uncomfortable as I had expected to be, that the strangeness of the situation receded more quickly than I would have predicted, that these people were simply people, and I was simply a person, and the connection between us was real even if its circumstances were unlike any circumstances I had encountered before. At some point, the younger niece was looking at my hands while I held my coffee cup, and she said, almost to herself, quietly enough that it felt like she hadn't quite meant to say it aloud, "You have her hands. Linda's hands." I set the cup down. I looked at my hands. Then I looked at Linda's hands, which were resting on the table in front of her. I have thought about that moment many times. The specific thing it did to me. I have these hands. I have always had these hands. These particular proportions. The length of the fingers. The way they look when they are resting and not doing anything. I have carried them my entire life. I have looked at them every day. And I have never, not once, seen them in another person's hands. Until Linda's kitchen table. Until a Saturday morning in Columbus with pastries and coffee and 4 hours of conversation that was both new and, in some way I don't entirely have words for, familiar. Something fills in when you find a feature you carry without knowing where it came from. Something closes. Some small question that you did not know you were asking because you had never known there was anything to ask. I did not know I had been carrying that question. And then I looked at Linda's hands and I understood that I had been carrying it my whole life. Quietly, without registering it as a gap. My father and I still talk. I want to be honest about what that means, what it looks like now versus what it looked like before, because both of those things are real, and I am not interested in misrepresenting either of them. What it looked like before was a relationship I moved through with almost no friction, a relationship that was simply part of the fabric of my life. The Sunday evening calls and the visits a few times a year, and the specific ease of being with someone who has known you since before you were a person in any full sense of the word. What it looks like now is different. There is friction. There is something between us that we don't have words for yet. Something that has changed the texture of the relationship without canceling what was true about it before. He did not take me. He did not plan it. He did not deceive anyone deliberately. He was deceived. He was a man who wanted a child, and who was given a story by the person he loved most, and who chose to receive that story without asking the questions that might have unraveled it. I understand how that happens. I understand the mechanism of it, the specific way that wanting something very badly can make a person selectively blind. I am not without understanding for it, but he did not ask. And Linda Reyes spent 30 years looking for Elena. And those two facts exist in relationship to each other in a way that I have not found a clean way to think about. And I suspect I will not find a clean way for a long time. Perhaps not ever. We still talk on Sundays. He still mentions the Cardinals. He still makes the pasta. He is older now, and the house in Phoenix is quieter than it was. And there is a grief between us that has no precise name and that we are both learning to carry. When I visit, I sit at the kitchen table with the afternoon light through the window, and I drink his coffee, and I look at the face I have known my whole life. The face that held me when I was a baby. The face that sat in bleachers in July heat. The face that looked at me when I needed things and found a way to provide them. And I try to hold all of it. The love that is real, and the wrong that was allowed to continue. The father I have and the thing that was done, and the woman in Columbus who deserved answers 33 years sooner than she received them. I have not made it clean. I don't think it becomes clean. I think it becomes something you learn to carry alongside the other things you carry. And you learn, over time, to carry it without it crushing everything else. Let me tell you what I know now. I know that I was born Elena Reyes in Columbus, Ohio, on a Wednesday morning in October of 1989, and that I was named after a woman my biological mother had loved and lost when she was 12 years old, and that I weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces and had dark hair and a face that made my mother think I was already thinking about something serious. I know that she was alone in her recovery room when I was taken and that she did not know. When she woke from the sleep her body had pulled her into after 15 hours of labor, that I was already gone. I know that a woman named Margaret Calloway was in Columbus, Ohio in October of 1989. I know she stayed in a motel 2 miles from the hospital. I know she came to the maternity ward twice in the week before I was taken, and that she presented herself as a visitor and chatted with the nurses and seemed to know how hospitals worked because she had spent 11 years working in medical settings, and she understood the language and the layout and how to belong in a space that was not hers. I know she took me from the nursery and drove to Phoenix and told her husband she had made an arrangement and raised me in a house with jacaranda trees and a kitchen with afternoon light through the window. And she came to every school play, and she held my hands across the table when I was 5, and she told me I was adopted. I know that Linda Reyes submitted her DNA to every available platform. I know she renewed contact with the FBI every year. I know she stayed on every registry and kept that profile active and checked it every morning and every evening for 3 years. I know she wrote those words, looking for information about a daughter born in Columbus in 1989, and left them there like a light on in a window. And I know she waited 33 years. I know that my name is Sarah Calloway. I know that my name is Elena Reyes. I know that both of those things are true simultaneously and that they always will be. That there is no version of this in which one of them cancels the other, and that the work of being both of those people at once is work that has no completion date. I know that the woman who raised me did something that cannot be defended. I know that she was also the woman who sat across from me at a kitchen table when I was 5, and chose every word with such care that I did not cry. I know that both of those things are true, and that they will always both be true, and that finding a way to hold them together is part of what my life is now. I know that Linda Reyes has a garden she tends from April through October. I know there is a chair near the roses. I know she has been saying my name every day for 33 years. I know that I have her hands. If you have ever done one of those tests and found something at the top of your match list that you were not expecting, a name you didn't recognize, a relationship that didn't fit the story you had been given, a door in a wall you had always thought was solid, I want you to know that you are not alone in that experience. More people have had that moment than you might think. The databases are large enough now that these discoveries happen constantly, quietly, to ordinary people living ordinary lives who swabbed a tube and mailed it back and forgot about it for 6 weeks. Some of what they find is beautiful. Some of it is painful. Some of it is both at the same time, tangled together in ways that don't come apart cleanly. If you have been given a version of your own story that doesn't entirely fit, it is okay to look more closely at it. It is okay to send the message. It is okay to make the call, to book the flight, to walk through the doors of an arrivals hall in a city you have never been to before, and look for a woman in a green coat who is holding her purse with both hands because staying still is taking effort. It is okay to say your name to someone who has been waiting to hear it. Linda Reyes waited 33 years to hear mine. Some things are worth that wait. If this story moved you, share it with someone you love. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me one person in your life who you're going to reach out to this week. Someone you have been meaning to call. Someone you have been meaning to tell something. I read every comment. Everyone. Subscribe if you haven't. I will see you in the next one.